Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be a part of the 4th Cinephilosophy International Symposium on Cinema and Philosophy, and welcome our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Thomas Wartenberg. He is going to give a speech about the philosophy in my octopus teacher, but before that, allow me to give some information about him. Professor Emeritus of Philosophy from Mount Holyoke College, Thomas Wartenberg works on philosophy and popular culture. He has specialized on a wide variety of fields like philosophy of film, aesthetics, philosophy for children, history of philosophy, especially Kant and the 19th century philosophy, and existentialism. He is the writer of numerous publications. We can name two of his books: Unlikely Couples, Movie Romance as Social Criticism, published in 1999, and Thinking on Screen, Film as Philosophy, published in 2007. Finally, he's also just a fascinating person, and we are all in for a treat today. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Thomas Wartenberg.
Thank you very much, both for that nice introduction and to the organizers of the conference for inviting me to give this talk. I'm sorry that I can't be with you physically, but as film scholars, maybe we're all used to looking at images and treating them as real. Before I begin my talk, let me just say that I'm focusing on a documentary film here, and documentary films have not been given, I think, enough attention in the debates about whether films can do philosophy, which is the central thing that I've been working on over the years. And so in addition to just exploring this film, I hope to be expanding the range of types of films, of genres of film that we philosophers of film talk about. So I'm now going to hopefully share my screen and let you see my PowerPoint. So the title of my talk is Enlarging Our Moral Community. Hold on, that's the wrong. I'm sorry. Let me see if I can. This is embarrassing. That was an earlier version of the talk. There we go. Sorry about that. Transforming Our Ethical Perspective, my octopus teacher and philosophy. One question that continually dogs philosophers is what constitutes progress in their discipline. Scientific disciplines such as biology and physics have what appear to be a clear progressive trajectory in which better theories replace worse, outmoded ones. Most people believe, therefore, that science is progressive. But equally prevalent is a questioning of how philosophy could even be that. After all, some central philosophical questions, first articulated in ancient Greece 2.5 millennia ago, still remain unresolved. Take the question of whether life has a meaning. While philosophers have proposed different answers throughout the ages, this thorny old chestnut remains as puzzling today as it did when Aristotle attempted to provide the first systematic answer to it in his Nicomachean Ethics. Still, there are some areas in which philosophy definitely does make progress. The most evident area in which progress is manifest is ethics. The norms governing our behavior appear to have developed in ways that suggest a progressive, not just social, but also philosophical development. I mean, most people now are not cannibals, and people would count that as progress, and that also receives a philosophical justification.
Professor
One way in which, yes,
sorry for interrupting, but are you showing us a PowerPoint presentation because we can't see it?
Can you not see it?
No, that's why I wanted to tell you.
Sorry. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay. You haven't missed anything. um, One way in which this progress can be seen is when there's a transformation in the fundamental beliefs about what types of behavior are morally permissible. The example I will use in this talk is the question of what attitudes human beings should take towards their natural environment. In Western culture, the fundamental belief for many centuries was nature and all human creatures were there for the benefit of human beings so that people could treat them in any way that served to advance their own well-being. This belief finds its support in the first chapter of Genesis, when God gives human beings dominion over all other creatures on the planet and over the earth itself. And here's a quote from Genesis. It's chapter 1, verse 26. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over the cattle and over all the earth. And that's the relevant part, over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So everything that exists, including the earth itself, is there to serve human beings who have a right to dominate them and use them for our own purposes. Belief that the world was created for the benefit of human beings led to the depredation of the planet that now threatens human life. We just had a big storm, I think, in Tennessee, where 100 people were killed. It's pretty amazing. Many philosophers have argued that there needs to be a fundamental transformation in how we regard the earth and all the creatures that inhabit it. For example, already in 1973, Richard Rowley argued that there needed to be a fundamental transformation in the basic ethical system that was dominant in the West. He characterized that dominant system as involving human chauvinism and claimed that it needed to be replaced by a system that treated the environment as invaluable in itself. Since that time, the field of environmental ethics has prospered, offering the hope that such an ethical transformation will occur in Western society. The threat of global warming that now threatens the future existence of human life on the planet puts a new urgency on the need to develop a different way of existing on the planet if we do not want to destroy our own lives as well as those of many other species. Philosophically speaking, what this requires is that the development of that we develop an alternative model of ethical behavior in regard to the planet and the creatures who live on it. And that's what environmental ethics is supposed to do. Now, what I'm claiming is that this represents an example of philosophical progress, the very thing that I said people doubt at the beginning of this talk. What I should be arguing this in my talk is that the need for the sort of transformation and fundamental ethical perspective I have briefly just sketched out can also be presented in a film. In fact, I think the film that won the 2021 Academy Award for Best Documentary, My Octopus Teacher, which was directed by Pippa Ehrlich and James Reed and produced by Craig Foster, who also stars in it, that this film makes the case for the necessity of just such an ethical transformation, albeit in a very specific context. I will show that the film attempts to change our attitude towards octopuses so that we see them as similar to ourselves. As a result, we will incur an obligation to protect them and the fragile environment they need to survive. And if you haven't seen it, I don't know if it's available in your country, but it's on Netflix here since they produced it. So what I'm claiming then is that I'll explain that picture in a moment. It looks very weird, but you can see that there's an octopus and it's sort of surrounded with clamshells and a rock and various other things. So what I'm claiming is that the film does philosophy by challenging our assumption that the creature like an octopus is so different from us that the ethical principles govern our interactions with other human beings do not apply to it. I mentioned earlier that we're no longer cannibals, but a lot of people enjoy eating octopus. And I used to before seeing the film and reading a book that I'll reference in a minute. Now, octopuses certainly look very different from human beings. As Peter Godfrey Smith remarks in his discussion of making contact with cephalopods like the octopus, cephalopod is the genus to which octopuses belong. This is probably the closest we will come to meeting an intelligent alien. That was Godfrey Smith. Foster shares this initial view of the octopus, but it changes during the course of his interactions with it. The film uses Foster's own transformation as a guide to how we should actually treat the octopus in its environment, the kelp forest. Kelp is a type of seaweed plant, and we'll see lots of pictures of it in a minute. The film suggests that octopuses are more like us than we generally acknowledge, for they are highly intelligent and capable of forming emotional attachments. As a result, rather than seeing the octopus as other, a creature completely alien to human beings, we ought to see the octopus as very much like ourselves, and hence realize that our ethical principles about how to treat others should apply to them. This requires us to refrain from killing them, especially when we do so in order to eat them. Instead, we should do what we can to protect them and the environment necessary for them to exist and prosper. So that's the claim I'm saying the film tries to get us to accept. My Octopus Teacher is a film with a complex relationship between its image and soundtracks. The soundtrack itself consists of three different elements. First, there is diegetic sound, as when we hear the sound of the waves that the image track shows breaking. It is diegetic because the sounds we hear are exactly what someone present at the scene would have heard. The film presents the recorded sounds in the same manner as the recorded images. It may be that some of these sounds were added during post-production, but the idea remains. The sounds included in this way are meant to show the audience what Foster's interaction with the octopus sounded like. Second, there is non-diegetic sound. This can take a variety of forms. The most evident is the music that accompanies the soundtrack. When the film focuses, for example, on a shark's failed attempt to eat the octopus, in addition to the apparently diegetic sounds representing the events we see on the screen, a restful piano solo plays. I mean, there's a question about whether those sounds that you hear that sound like the ocean are actually diegetic or not, but I won't go in. We can talk about that later. So the piano solo, however, is non-diegetic because no one underwater following the events would have heard a piano playing. The sound of the piano was added by the filmmakers to convey a mood, here at Foster's and our own relief, that the octopus was not eaten by a shark. The final element of the soundtrack is Foster's narration. Although it occurs throughout the film, there are a number of distinct aspects to it. Sometimes he's contributing a voiceover, and this can take a number of different forms. I think I'm going to skip that because of time. So I'm just saying that the voiceovers can have a variety of different functions. And again, if you're interested, let's talk about it later. So My Octopus Teacher tells the story of Foster's nearly year-long relationship with an octopus. Before focusing on the plot of the film, however, I want to say something about the visual images that we see. Foster is credited with having filmed the underwater sequences of the film, but Peter Ehrlich and James Reed are listed as its directors. These two filmmakers created the film we are watching from the video that Foster recorded during his year-long relation with the octopus, but added scenes in which Foster is interviewed and reflects upon his experiences during the time he spent observing and interacting with the octopus. So Ehrlich was actually the first one involved, and then she brought Reed in to help with the interviews. Now, the film is visually stunning. The extended sequences in which we observe the octopus going about its daily life are nothing short of amazing. And I'm sorry that I don't have time to show you them. What we witness is the entire underwater world that most of us have not had the opportunity to see. The sea off of the South African coast, which is where the film takes place, is filled with a wide variety of plants and creatures that the film manages to capture for us in an array of gorgeous shots. We also get lovely views of many unusual sea creatures as Foster follows them as they go about their business. There is no doubt that a good deal of interest elicited by the film stems from the incredible photography that records life underwater. So the film begins with Foster describing a midlife crisis he is experiencing. He tells us that he had become disillusioned with his previous life and his career as a filmmaker. And the film shows that to us. So he returns to the Western Cape of South Africa, where he had grown up, and goes skin diving as he had as a boy. Despite the wickedly cold water, it's about 8 degrees centigrade. He enjoys diving, and it rekindles his interest in filming. At first, he focuses on the kelp forest he discovers. But when he stumbles on an odd collection of rocks and shells, what you see in the image now, and that's revealed to be an octopus in disguise, his plans changed. It is this surprising discovery that prompts Foster to record the octopus's life as it struggles to survive in a hostile environment. Foster tells us that he followed the octopus every day for a year, the rough lifespan of the creature. The film wisely does not show us shots from each day, instead only depicting the evolution of Foster's relationship with the octopuses by focusing on days during which something significant happens between them. Now, as I've said, the film depicts a change in Foster's attitude towards octopuses. Initially, Foster thought of this octopus in a manner determined by its unusual appearance. And he tells us this in the film's first spoken line when he says, "A lot of people say an octopus is like an alien," very much like Godfrey Smith's claim. Now, many viewers of the film will likely share Foster's initial attitude towards octopuses. After all, they look very similar to the alien creatures we see in science fiction films. While an octopus is not threatening in the way that the creature in the Alien series is, it is equally as different in appearance from human beings as H.R. Geiger's cinematic creation. Since octopuses can change their appearance in radical ways, they really do seem to be an example of an alien creature living beneath the sea. Foster's initial perception of the octopus as an alien creature, a being who is totally different than him, has some justification. At a physical level, the octopus has a completely different physiology than that possessed by humans. For an example, an octopus intelligence is not localized to its brain as ours is. Their arms have 2/3 of their neurons and 2,000 suckers, which give them information about their environments. Octopuses have, quite literally, an extended mind. These physiological differences are part of what accounts for Foster's initial sense that the octopus was an alien being. Now, Foster's attitude towards the octopus undergoes a significant change as a result of his spending so much time with her. And I'll explain the her in a moment. But the strange thing is, his narration continues, as you get closer to them, you realize we and the octopus are very similar in a lot of ways. And that's a quote from Foster. And what justifies the change in his attitude is that he discovers that there are a lot of traits that octopuses and human beings shared that are belied by the differences in the appearances of the two types of being. The footage that we see in the film mostly comes from the crucial days during the evolution of Foster's view of the octopus. The first important event takes place on day 25 of Foster's experiment, when the octopus actually touches Foster's hand. I'm sorry, that was supposed to be, I should have shown you that. So that's the difference. Actually, Foster looks a little alien there too, but there are differences in the appearances of the two creatures. And here is the octopus touching Foster's hand. The octopus does this after Foster had been visiting every day for a while, and the octopus has become less skittish around Foster. Foster holds his hand out, and the octopus comes to embraces. And it's this willingness of the octopus to come close to Foster that shows that it's begun to trust Foster. And its exhibition of this complex emotional response that's crucial, and is what begins Foster's reconsideration of the completely alien status that he had attributed to the octopus. Now, trust is an important part of our human life. Without trust, many of our basic practices would fall apart. One example is promising. If you couldn't trust that the person who promised you something would keep that promise, there would be no point to promising. So by recognizing that trust is a characteristic that the octopus has, Foster begins to see that this creature that appears so alien actually has certain characteristics that are very similar to human beings and that are fundamental to human life. So he starts to see that the differences in the appearance between himself and the octopus are much less important than the similarities in the emotional life or the intelligent life that the two have. So Foster begins to tell us that octopuses are very vulnerable creatures. They don't have an internal skeleton or an exoskeleton like most mollusks, so they don't have shells. So they're incredibly vulnerable. And that's part of why the exhibition of trust here that you see in this image is so important. But one of the interesting things that Foster tells us is that because of this vulnerability, the octopuses have developed a range of different strategies to protect them from their predators. So they can match the colors and textures of their surroundings, which is an ability that allows them to hide in plain sight. We saw a little bit of that in that image of the octopus with all the shells over it, but it can also just by itself blend in to various different environments. Now, the question of how the octopus is able to blend into its environment is an interesting one, but again, I'm going to skip it. And what I'm showing you in this image here is two things. First of all, two things that are crucial to the octopus's ability to evade its predators. First of all, it has a jet propulsion system that allows it to expel water and therefore move away from its predators extremely fast. When it does so, it often emits the sort of black ink cloud. And this ink cloud has a couple of functions. First of all, it makes it hard to see the octopus, so a predator can't see it. And it also has an odor, which particularly sharks use the octopus's odor to track it. And this helps them evade that. Now, it's noteworthy that in describing this, Foster says that the octopus manifests what he says, formidable intelligence. Those are his words. And Godfrey Smith also emphasizes this characteristic of the octopus. Godfrey Smith is a philosopher who's also a deep sea diver, and he's written a book called Other Minds about the octopus. And there are certain interesting parallels between the two of them. And if I have time, we can talk a little bit about the difference between what the film does and what a written text like Godfrey Smith's can do. So the interesting thing is that octopus is split off of the line of development, in evolution that led to human beings. So unlike, for example, apes, very early on, but nonetheless, they developed independently a type of intelligence. And I mentioned earlier that it's not localized in their brain. Foster admits through his observation of the octopus that it manifests an incredible amount of intelligence. One sequence in which he argues for this is one in which the octopus attempts to capture a crab. Now, the crab keeps hiding under some kelp to avoid being eaten by the octopus. And in an exhibition of strategic planning, the octopus hides, getting the crab to come out from its hiding place. And as it soon does, the octopus jumps and grabs the crab. What's even more amazing is that when the octopus encounters a lobster, which is another one of its food sources, it tries the same strategy, but the lobster isn't fooled. So what the octopus starts doing is eventually it realizes the way to get the lobster is to go high up, so the lobster can't see it. And then when the lobster moves, he can come down and capture it and eat it. One of the most important, fascinating scene occurs when a shark is attempting to eat the lobster. The octopus. It seems like basically two things happen. In one sequence, the shark actually gets to the octopus and bites off one of its arms. And although it looks like the octopus is going to die, it manages not to. And one of the amazing features of the octopus is it's able to regenerate that arm. So the tentacle grows back. And Foster's just blown away by this. One of the things he says is that there's not a lot of research on the octopus, biological research, and he's trying to encourage that. And I think a lot more has been done recently. So now at this point, Foster speaks directly to the camera about his experience with the octopus and how he has been changed by their relationship. This is a really interesting thing, right? He undergoes a fundamental change in his own life. He claims to have been sensitized to others, other human beings, having taught to be so by the octopus. The notion of the other is one that philosophers from Hegel to Sartre and de Beauvoir have analyzed. Although they think of the relationship between a self and an other as limited to human beings, their analysis can be extended to a creature such as an octopus. And what we've seen is that initially it's the appearance of the octopus that sort of put off Foster, but as he began to see it manifesting emotions like trust and intelligence, he began to see that the octopus was pretty similar to human beings. And this shows that there's a lot more similarity between octopuses and human beings than he initially believed. And the final characteristics that he thinks we share with the octopus is the difficulty of our lives. Foster himself, as I said, is coming off a difficult emotional time, what we would often refer to as an existential crisis. It's not clear that the octopus is having an existential crisis, but it faces lots of physical dangers in its life that it has to deal with. And Foster senses a commonality between the two of them. As a result, through his interactions with the octopus, Foster's relationship with others, and in particular with his son Tom, change. And he actually begins to spend time in the water with Tom, eventually finding great joy in mentoring his son in the ways of the stunningly beautiful underground world that he's discovered or rediscovered. One of the most amazing examples of the octopus's intelligence occurs when a shark attacks it again. And in order to elude it, the octopus actually climbs onto land. And it can't remain on land very long, so it goes over this little isthmus and goes back on the water on the other side, but the shark's waiting for it and tries to capture it. So what the octopus does at this point is actually climbs on the back of the octopus, which I don't have an image of that. And he basically rides the shark. I said the octopus rides on the back of the shark, and he rides the shark. And at a certain point, then he can just slide off and escape. Now, octopus is only, let me just say that this is a really great example of all sorts of strategic thinking that the octopus is manifesting, and differential responses to the threat that the shark poses to it. And so it's part of and Foster's understanding of that is part of the grounds for his recognition that there's a lot more similarity between himself and the octopus than he initially believed. So the octopus winds up dying. They only live for about a year, and there's a lot of interest in that, but I'm just going to move past that and talking about Foster reflecting on his own experiences. We actually see him struggling to express the emotions that he feels in regard to the octopus as he attempts to sum up what he thinks he has learned from her. The film is after all called My Octopus Teacher. And here's what he says: "She made me realize just how precious wild places are." As he speaks, we see him swimming among the wild sea creatures such as seals, while the soundtrack plays non-diegetic, meditative music that accentuates his reflective mood. And then again, he says, "You slowly start to care about all the animals, even the tiniest little creatures. You realize that everyone is important." And he sums up his experience by saying, quote, "She taught me to feel a part of the place, not a visitor." Now, what I've been arguing is that Foster has learned something else that is very significant, namely that a creature that he initially took to be completely other to him is not as different as he initially believed. During the year that he was observing the octopus, his attitude towards it underwent a fundamental transformation. He came to see that a creature that he had thought of as completely alien bore many similarities to him. And as I said, there are three main things that he attributed to the octopus: emotions, intelligence, and a life filled with difficulties. And I think the film's ability to get us to see the reasonableness of his transformation is a great achievement. Now, I began my talk by discussing how transforming our ethical beliefs can be a marker of ethical progress. So the question that My Octopus teaches is, what ethical principles should govern our interaction with octopuses? And what I want to say is that this can be a marker of progress. For the answer that the film proposes is that because of the octopus's similarity to human beings, we need to acknowledge that we should treat them with care and respect. And what this means is that we need to protect the octopus and ensure that their habitat remains capable of supporting their life, rather than to see them both as merely there to serve human interests. Now, it's important to acknowledge that the film does not make an explicit case for human beings changing how they treat octopuses. It shows Foster as doing that. So in this respect, a difference from a book like Other Minds, the book by Peter Godfrey Smith, who spent a lot of time telling us about the biology of octopuses and how they work. But the important difference is that Godfrey Smith, makes specific claims about how we should treat octopuses. He begins by explaining that for a long time, human beings did not have to worry about preserving the sea because we really didn't make much of an impact on it. But now, because of our capacity to stress its systems being so much greater, Godfrey Smith says, human beings have an obligation to protect the sea. And he points out that there are many reasons, and these are his words, for us to appreciate and take care of oceans. When you dive into the sea, he says, you're diving into the origin of all of us. By protecting the ocean and its creatures, he claims we are preserving a resource that can give us insight into our own nature. My octopus teacher has a different strategy for getting us to view octopuses as creatures with many similarities to ourselves. And it's that provides a rationale for protecting them and the environment they need to survive. So in order to leave some time for discussion, I'm just going to end right here. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Wartenberg. That was an inspirational talk, and I'm going to wait for questions if there are any. But while gathering the questions, I would like to ask one. So, documentary films, in its most classical definition, is all about realness, the feeling of realness, and they aestheticize reality. And probably they are not as popular as fictional movies, like they are not as industrial as others. But this movie stands out among others, and people like this movie a lot. And a lot of people say that they cried at the end. So it evokes, obviously, it evokes some emotions. Why do you think this movie is so popular?
Thank you very much for that question. It's very interesting. Let me start by saying I think Michael Moore actually has transformed the popularity of documentary films. Although many people don't really like his films, because of their basically financial success, documentaries became much more popular, and many interesting strategies were adopted for making a documentary film that made them very different from the earlier types of documentaries in which you heard a voiceover and, you know, the sort of things that were done on TV. Those were exposés, and you had a voiceover explaining things, and you saw images that confirmed claims made in the voiceover. I think now documentary films are very different, and this is one example. I mean, there are many others, and completely different from one another. So I think that's a very interesting development, first of all. But your question about the success of this film is a very interesting one. I mean, first of all, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, there's just we just get to see the life of this octopus, and it's just completely amazing. It's really beautiful, right? So there's stunning photography. It's like those nature documentaries which I actually haven't seen very many of them because it's not my favorite thing to watch on TV. But, you know, where Richard Attenborough takes you and he shows you something about some natural area that you knew nothing about. I mean, people enjoy watching those. And I think there's an aspect of this film and its popularity that just stems from the incredible beauty of what we see, and also the amazing nature of the octopus. We learn so much about what an octopus is like, you know. As I told you, I stopped eating octopuses after watching this film. I mean, I just thought, I can't eat a creature that's this smart. So it changed my behavior, as a matter of fact. But I also think that the film, when the filmmakers, the two directors constructed the film, they were able to impose a very interesting narrative on it. And one of the things that this film has in common with fiction films is a strong narrative. In part, it's the narrative of the life of the octopus, because we don't see its birth, but we see it when it's very young, and we follow it over the course of a year until it dies. So there's an interest in that arc. There's a narrative arc there. And then there's also the narrative arc of Foster's transformation. And so I think there's a way in which there's a sort of tragic dimension to the film. We start realizing it's hard for us to think that an octopus can live a full life in 1 year. And we start seeing these creatures as embodying a certain tragic element. So I think that's an important thing to realize. So that's how I would answer your question.
Yeah, that was quite well. Thank you. I'm gonna ask you if there are any questions. Sorularımız varsa alabiliriz.
I think some people raise their hands during the talk. I don't know, on Zoom. I didn't look because I was talking.
I guess there are no more questions, and our time is actually up. So, Professor Wartenberg, thanks a lot for your contribution. That was marvelous, and it was a great experience for all of us. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thank you all very much.
You're welcome.